Thanks for watching Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. We are on technology for this evening. Joining me is Olivier Klein. He is the head of emerging technologies of Asia Pacific for AWS. Here to discuss the ongoings of the company as well as the industry at large. Olivier, thanks again for sharing the time with us. You're a very busy man, but AWS is an extremely interesting company to speak with. Let's talk about some of the key highlights of AWS for last year before we jump into what's happening this year.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity. So I think, overall, if you look at the cloud computing industry in AWS, we've been around for many different years, and we're really looking into how can we help our customers best, right? And so there are many different areas. As you're familiar with, a lot of machine learning things, AI-related services that are being launched, a lot around analytics. But we work a lot on the core services also. How can we make compute, databases, storage more effective? If we talk about analytics, for example, storage is a very key component to that. How can we lower the cost from that? We look into the space of 5G and IoT devices. How do we get closer to the edge? How can we build or help our customers build applications that really allow for low latency kind of applications, and then even scenarios like smart cities, etc. So a really broad spectrum of services where we continuously try to help our customers, number one, make it easier, more effective to kind of build and experiment, but continuously also lower the cost in the way they deploy their applications.
About a decade ago, there seems to be an obvious gap between executives or business leaders with the technology guys. But as we go into the decade, we've realized that this gap is actually quite narrowing. Business leaders, particularly CEOs or even CFOs, are now quite familiar with the kind of things that are going through with the tech guys, the CTOs, the CIOs. And when it trickles down to their relevant people and the relevant divisions, you would see a gap between the knowledge of these two, I guess, business drivers actually narrowing even further. Absolutely. Resulting in companies now understanding what they don't have, and therefore what they know that what they don't have and what they want, and they can articulate the kind of things that they want for you guys to actually solve. Do you think that the business questions are now becoming more challenging to solve because now it's getting clearer what they need and what you can deliver to them, including things like machine learning and AI and many others?
So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think, traditionally we kind of saw as IT as a supporting function to part of the business, and with the entire digital transformation exercise that we see happening in pretty much every industry, we're kind of looking into, okay, how can we help use technology to drive business outcomes? I think the conversation becomes easier because instead of just saying, okay, I need to use machine learning, that's not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is to say, what is the outcome that I want to drive? I want to be more cost efficient. I want to build a better customer experience. I want to create a complete new product. And then from there, we generally help our customers also to work backwards and say, what would be the right technology to use? Maybe here you need to use analytics or machine learning. Maybe here are some services that can help you achieve that. And that conversation really brings together, the business owners, the product owners of a company together with, maybe the IT supporting functions that all is kind of joined together now, and that helps that drive that conversation a lot better. I overall think that, traditionally that was a lot harder. Cloud computing overall has enabled the ability to say, as I build a product, I can go and pick and choose the services that I want. And one of the reasons for that is really because, you have higher level services that are now offered to you. Traditionally you had to build a data center, you had to rack and stack servers, install it, maintain all of that, and that's a lot of overhead that is kind of taken away from you. Obviously on our platform you can go as deep as you want, but you can also just say, hey, I want an AI service. All I need to do is click a few buttons and I got a chatbot, for example, using Amazon Lex, or I make a few API calls and I get access to these higher level services. And that allows us to kind of really go straight into the business outcome that we're trying to drive, and then understand what's the right kind of stack or service that we're trying to use.
And of course, when you do this better at your end, when you try to make things a little bit more efficient, you can now start to help up and coming companies, startups, middle-sized companies to actually apply some of the technologies that you guys have. How is that coming along in terms of servicing this particular SME sector?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, startups, for example, for startups, it's generally a no-brainer to use cloud computing, right? Because they don't have any existing infrastructure. They say, we just straight want to get started. We want to build our product. You got service that can help me do that. And most importantly, I think one of the other things is not just the entry level or removing that heavy lifting of building infrastructure, what have you. But it's also the element that you only pay for what you use, and that's a very compelling story for smaller enterprises and for startups, because you align your spend that you have with your user base or your product itself. So as you grow, it grows with you, but at the same time, when we talk about scaling, it's not just scaling up, it's also the ability to say it automatically scales down. If I have less traffic, I have less users on my platform, less utilization, I spend also less on what I'm consuming. And that's a very compelling element for cloud computing in general.
We'll jump into some of the technologies that are currently in place, but before that, I still want to touch on some of the nuts and bolts, including that of regulatory requirements of various countries. The financial sector, for instance, in Malaysia is heavily regulated. Data protection is, of course, heavily regulated in all the countries that you operate in, or most of the countries that you operate in. Do you think that managing these kind of different regulations and different regulatory requirements actually bring about more burdensome kind of or cumbersome solutions, or it actually helps in you solving the problems for your companies even better, for the clients even better?
No, it's a great question. I think it's a very important element. And if you look at the way we designed AWS, we always have security as our top priority, right? The way we design our services, we encourage all of our customers always encrypt data with your own key. We have some best practices. We have actually services that can help you understand, here are the best practices, whatever you currently run, your workload, is it aligned with those best practices? Also, if you look at the way we actually deploy things, we have this concept of AWS regions, right? Where you can specifically say, I want my data to be stored in this specific location, I want to encrypt it in that manner, I want to put those security or access controls on top of it. So we give our customers the full controls over how they handle their data, where they store it. And for some customers, let's say they want to go global, they obviously say, okay, please replicate my data everywhere in the world. Whereas for other customers, they want to be very specific around, it only sits here, it only sits in my virtual private cloud, in my isolated network, because you do have the ability to say, even whatever I store, I completely disconnect it from the internet. So bottom line basically is we want to give our customers the controls and the services that can help put those controls in place to say, you store your data, you encrypt your data, you're in full control and ownership of that data. And depending on the requirements that you have, you might want to lock that down. Depending, let's say if you have a public website, then obviously you might want to make it available to the internet. So from day one, we always had that concept in mind, and we designed the platform with that in mind, of giving the customer full control of the data and where it sits.
All right, Ollie, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with AWS. Thanks for staying on with us. I'm with Ollie of AWS. He's the head of emerging technologies at an emerging technology company, which is also fun. Ollie, the fascination between the Malaysian corporate sector, at least for this part of the year, other than the coronavirus, of course, is of course 5G. 5G is being rolled out. Late last year, we've seen a big hoo-ha over at Langkawi, and the application in Putrajaya as well is taking place, Cyberjaya, whatever, and it's really taking shape in terms of the applications that can be built around it. But it becomes clearer now that the application for 5G, at least at this point in time, is more for enterprises rather for retailers or retail individuals, people like me. What would be some of the key things that we can talk about for 5G when it comes to cloud, and what AWS is doing when 5G finally arrives and is rolled out for the mass?
Absolutely. And I think I'll probably start off a little bit on looking at the overall vision of 5G. I think one of the interesting reasons why 5G is talked about a lot, because it's not just an iteration that we had from 3G to 4G, where we say we have more bandwidth, faster speed kind of scenario. That absolutely holds true. With 5G you get a lot more bandwidth, a lot faster speeds. You can have a lot more devices in the vicinities that you operate. But I think with that in mind, there come a few other interesting elements. Like, for example, you bring down the latency, where traditionally for mobile applications that latency was relatively high. You bring down that latency to a very, a few milliseconds kind of scenario. And you also allow devices within a cellular structure, within a certain parcel, a region, to kind of talk to each other. And that enables completely different new use cases. The traditional model, let's say, if you have a mobile application, right? Let's say you book yourself a Grab or what have you, and it goes from your mobile application to a cell tower, to a distribution center, to eventually some data center, in this scenario AWS actually, and then travels travels all the way back to maybe talk to the driver. 5G enables communication that happen between that vicinity where the cell tower sits. And that opens up complete new applications, specifically in the space of IoT, analytics at the edge. So that happens right there, machine learning at the edge. And so AWS mission here is, again, how can we simplify that for developers, right? Because one of the challenges that you have is to say, how can I bring logic to that edge location? How can I put my logic that I built for my company into the cell tower structure that a telecommunication provider would provide? And so we recently announced a service called AWS Wavelength, where we basically operate with telecommunications provider together and provide these services on the cell tower structures themselves. So you operate on the same AWS APIs, but they can now happen at the edge on the cell tower within that location of 500 or 1 kilometer radius, and that allows for complete new applications, right? Think about cars that can talk to traffic lights, that can talk to other mobile phones, etc., that device-to-device communications. And it also opens up that perspective of saying you can now have companies that build intelligent software that sits on those cell towers using AWS Wavelength that allow devices to communicate with each other that might otherwise not be able to communicate because the protocol isn't compatible or what have you. So it opens up a huge kind of opportunities around really allowing intelligence to happen at the edge location itself. And if we take, for example, the space of machine learning, right? Like training machine learning models, doing that in an AWS region in the cloud environment makes absolute sense, right? I get massive amount of compute, massive amount of storage, etc. But training is one thing. Sometimes I now want to make a prediction with that machine learning model. Think, for example, in the upcoming space of autonomous vehicles, right? They run generally computer vision models to do self-driving cars or even assisted vehicles. Those models are trained in a cloud computing environment, but then are pushed to the car itself. In this kind of scenario, we can now also push these machine learning models onto the cell tower structures, right? So that devices can actually operate or make predictions from the cell tower perspective itself directly right there. And that allows for constrained devices.
Yeah, but I see the conversation is also on trying to build autonomous vehicles, for instance, and applying it in a controlled setting versus on the street kind of performance. That becomes a little bit more tricky. V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, is going to be tricky when you put in real life experiences. V2X, even crazier, because now you want the vehicle to speak to a bunch of other stuff, including to city towns, to city hall, to traffic lights, to even human beings in and around the particular vehicle. Those kind of things are going to result in interesting kind of test case scenarios. So in the US, they've tried to do this with 5G and V2V, V2X in just 1 or 2, I guess, forward-thinking cities. But when they want to roll out nationwide or statewide even, there seems to be a lot of things going on. Of course, there's a political element to it, lobbies and many others, but there's some hesitancy in trying to roll out at a population-wide level. Do you think that the I guess countrywide application for these kind of forward-thinking technology, particularly emerging technology like the one that you're looking at, is going to face a lot of resistance from regulators, from city councils and stuff like that?
So I think it's like every technology, right? Like there's always a certain phased rollout that is happening, and I think we see exactly the same thing in the 5G space right here. I think it's more about enabling where it makes sense, right? As I mentioned earlier, from a technology perspective, it allows for use cases that are super low latency, and that allows for complete new use cases of having scenarios in a smart city, smart building. Autonomous vehicle is one, but I think it's still a bit early stage, to have them everywhere on the streets. But there are many other applications around smart cities, for example, where this makes sense. So I think technology is generally driven, like I mentioned earlier, by driving business outcomes. And I think the same thing applies here. As it becomes more and more compelling to actually roll out that technology will be rolled out. From an AWS perspective, we want to be there then to help any developer, any kind of company to kind of use that technology in an easy fashion and using the APIs that they are used to when they use our platform as such. So for us, it's kind of reducing that barrier of entry, and at the same time, as you asked me, I think it's a question of if there's a desire to roll something out because there's a real benefit to do it, generally that will happen.
Of course, another big conversation to talk about is analytics. Right now, the automation of analytics is enabling companies to do things that you never thought that they can do before this. It normally starts with somebody asking the computer, and the computer responds that query. For instance, Google Maps. You just ask something, and Maps will tell me, oh, you want to go to KLCC. This is how you get to KLCC. Now you have predictive, you have suggestive, and many others. At one point, it becomes creepy, but I think we've overcome that bit where things are now less creepier than before. But that's for individual application. When we talk about business application, things are getting a little bit more interesting as well. Could you share some ideas on where we are at?
Absolutely. I think, in terms of the space of analytics, I always like to talk about machine learning analytics in one slot together, because it kind of fits together. Because traditionally we looked at analytics as something, let me try to understand what happened in the past, and now we're moving into that space of real-time analytics, right? Analyze things as they're happening, and then even predict, which is the machine learning component, predict what could happen, and that prediction could be personalization, customization. Now, if you think about something like iFlix or Netflix, if you watch a movie, that's an analytics system under the hood that uses machine learning algorithms to understand, what should I recommend based on your watching patterns, etc. The reason this space is really rapidly evolving and why AWS is launching a lot of different services to facilitate that space is, we have a growing amount of data. And when I say growing, we're not talking linear growth, right? We're talking like exponential growth of data points. Right, it's just exploding. And that's great because it allows us to understand the physical world better, and allows us to understand users better. But the reason we can now do that is because with cloud computing, we kind of completely decoupled compute and storage. Historically, if you think about analytics, you had some data warehousing solution, which is a box that you install in your data center, right? And you put in the data in there and you run the queries against it. In the cloud computing environment, I can completely decouple those components. So I can say I have a very cost-effective kind of storage service where I store all the data from all the different sensors or POS systems or mobile applications or websites or click streams. I store it all in there, and now I can layer the right analytics services on top and only run those queries either way in real time or retrospectively when I require them, and that dramatically lowers the cost, but it also opens up a huge opportunity to say, I don't need to store data in a very structured format. I can first store data, and then later I can figure out what do I do with it to drive a better customer experience or drive, optimize my systems. In the logistics space, it's very often used to, find better routes around the city, or how can I reduce the cost of shipping goods, for example. And eventually then on top, you kind of layer that machine learning layer where you say, well, instead of just looking at what is happening right now in real time, I can even predict the future, right? Like I can say what would be the best shipping route tomorrow, given that I know the weather patterns, for example, that I know the traffic patterns that I have, so I can literally collect information from a variety of different platforms if they're open in that scenario, and then make better predictions as such. And driving those costs down, and also obviously making, with the help of services that AWS or other companies or some of our partners provide, making it really easy to kind of start analytics and machine learning, where traditionally you might have had to have a data scientist or a PhD in the space. You can now get started in way easier manners with a few clicks of a button, and off you go.
So the thing about AWS is, of course, the consultation that you bring to the table. Sometimes, even as companies are becoming more alert and aware of the solutions that are currently available, they're still doing their stuff. If they're Grab, they're still doing the industry that they're in. Yep. If they're a transport company, many others. Do you bring about to them some inspiration, like, okay, I know you guys are doing this, and there's something that is being developed elsewhere. This is how you make it work. What level of consultation in terms of inspiring your clients do you bring to the table? Is it more often than not, or it's more of just delivering what they ask for?
So it's really full-fledged. So certain customers come along and say, I have a very specific idea of what I want to do, just tell me exactly how I get it done. But very often it's the scenario as you mentioned, right? Customers lean towards us and say, you must have seen a lot of different things. Even Amazon.com, which is also a customer of AWS, what's a broader Amazon company kind of doing? Can you help us? And we obviously have solutions architects, we have professional services that can help with that, but we also recently announced a lot of programs and different scenarios, like the Machine Learning Solutions Lab, for example, where we have machine learning engineers from our broader Amazon business that can help you understand what you're trying to achieve, what would be the right machine learning models or algorithms or services to use to achieve that outcome. So I think it's really depending on the comfort level of the customer. Say, I have an idea, help me out, all the way to, I have a very specific kind of use case I want to implement, just show me exactly what's the best, most cost-effective way to do it. And our mission is really to make sure that we can put analytics and machine learning into the hands of any developer out there, no matter what your level of expertise is, and provide you support as such through either way, people or white papers or tutorials or training. So there are many, many different ways how it can help.
We'll take one more short break before we continue our conversation with Ollie of AWS. Thanks for staying on with us. I'm with Olivier Klein. He is the head of technology, emerging technologies at AWS. Oli, of course, the conversation that we keep on having right now is with AWS fast becoming much more profitable, much more valuable to Amazon than Amazon itself. The likelihood that I want to the comparison here is, for instance, Instagram is becoming much more valuable than Facebook is. What is the trajectory of AWS as a company moving forward? Are you going to go, separate ways with Amazon, try to build another company on its own, or are you still leveraging and leaning on each other and try to see this chemistry going to work for the next, near term?
Yeah, and I would refer to some great interview that has been done with our CEO in that scenario. I think that AWS was really spun out of some concepts that we had within Amazon itself, and I think there's absolutely no reason to do so. However, what I would say is our focus really lies within the customers. If you look at how the AWS platform is growing, it's really based on customer feedback that we keep getting, and that kind of way of operating a business has just proven tremendously beneficial in the sense of you don't just try to build a product and then try to sell it out, but it's really about let us help our customers, right?
The two industries that you guys are, and your CEO is actually talking about this a lot actually, two industries that you guys are truly disrupting is actually technology and retail. And moving forward, this is an industry where it's going to be a huge thing, at least for this part of the world, because in Southeast Asia we have 700 million consumers, plus China and India, you're going to get over 3 billion consumers, and if you don't disrupt this particular retail in this part of the world, you're going to lose out because your competitors are doing, similar things, and your competitors are doing it faster, better, cheaper, and the whole market here. And do you think that the competition is strong for you guys to deliver more, at least for AWS Asia Pacific?
Yeah, and I would only be able to talk to the AWS part of the business which I'm in. But in that regard, I think it's really about looking into, going back to my earlier point, if we do what is right for the customers, there's just a natural growth. The other element that I really look at is, if you look at the overall kind of IT spend that we have within the industry, cloud computing at this point in time is still just a fraction of what is actually happening.
What, so really? Companies are spending billions.
Well, but if we think about the overall IT budget that is available there, so we're really looking into what can we do better to help our customers, right? And with that in mind, there's such a tremendous amount of opportunity there. But again, going back to, I think, what is really the important factor here, if you think about cloud computing as a whole, when we started AWS off in the first time, right, we brought a new concept to the table, which is to say you can consume something when you need it, and you only pay for when you use it, and when you don't want to use it anymore, you just stop using it straight away. That was, 12, 13 years ago, a very foreign concept in the IT industry, right?
Well, now it's expected, actually.
And now it's expected, exactly. And I think that is what really drives the adoption of cloud computing, because you say, it's perfect for a customer. He can choose exactly what he needs when he needs it, or she needs it, in that kind of scenario, and you only spend for what you use. And on top of that, we keep layering additional functionalities and services that really help, again, make it easier to use some of the newer concepts. We talked to machine learning, analytics, there are many other areas like IoT or databases, etc. We invest a lot of time into building services that are purpose-built database structures, for example, for our customers, to just enable them to drive their business outcomes more effectively and easily as such.
All right. Final word. Is Asia Pacific going to be a big deal for AWS moving forward?
I think every market is really a great market. I personally myself here operate in Asia Pacific. I think it's a very interesting market, lots of things happening. We see lots of interesting startups that are popping up left, right, center, especially even here in Southeast Asia. Lots of enterprises that adopt the platform. Obviously a very important market for us, and I'm super excited to see what's coming up and coming.
That was my interview with Olivier Klein, the head of emerging technologies of Asia Pacific AWS. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to AstroAwani.com, look for Notepad. Interviews like this can be found there. You can also watch this interview on your mobile devices. Just download the AstroAwani app wherever you get the application. Thanks very much for watching. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.